So I'm a veterinarian with Holden Farms. Holden Farms is based in Northfield, Minnesota, just an hour or so south of here. And I'm going to kind of give you a perspective on what we do today in terms of surveillance, and then just kind of a quick snapshot on the EPS protocols and kind of compare the two. So just a brief overview. Holden Farms, production system based here in Minnesota. We'd have farms Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. To kind of just hit the point home on surveillance, we're about 72,000 sows across 20 different locations. And then at any one point in time, we'd have about over 200,000 nursery pigs at 50 locations and 500,000 finishing pigs at about 200 different locations. So you got to have something kind of streamlined in terms of surveillance to kind of keep track of all these different sites and pigs across all these different sites. So going to start with just a bit of what we do today. So kind of two main things. There's a lot of other things behind this, but just wanted to cover the two main surveillance pieces we have today. First would be kind of the normal daily observation from any caretaker employee on a farm. So all that information would be on the farm, daily observations recorded there. And then what we have, we're primarily contract production, so contract nursery, contract finishing. So we'd have a weekly visit or weekly observations from what we'd call a service manager or a service person. So they kind of take that summary from the week, get that into our data system via an app, and then we have all the summaries that we can look at site by site. So some of the main just health specific things that would be included there would be mortality. We have 3 different clinical sign scores, so cough score, lameness score, diarrhea score, and then just kind of some other random, any kind of medication. We track the number of individual treatments with an antibiotic that we'd have, and then they'd also be in charge of any health status changes that have taken place. So just kind of a quick snapshot or example. We're not going to cover everything on here, but just to kind of show you what it looks like. When we get it into a summary, and this can show up in a bunch of different ways, we can get charts, other things with this, with the data here. This is just an example of one site. This would be a finishing site, so from day one all the way to the end of marketing. And the information we'd have there then, the important stuff would be, we have all of our weekly summary mortality listed here. And then as you go forward, we'd have some of our scores. So we'd have a cough score, and then over here we'd have a lameness score and a diarrhea score. We also track the number of individual treatments and the different health statuses as well. So any point in time you can go in there, look at any site and kind of figure out what's going on. As a veterinarian with the company, it's helpful. I can get this in different formats too, but it's just a great way to have a snapshot of every single farm and what's happening. So this one I just threw up as an example. So this would be with just our normal surveillance we have today. It was quickly highlighted that this farm had some challenges, so got off to a really good start. We see the mortality start to increase. We see some of our health scores, individual treatments start to increase, and this was of course a PRRS break. So what this led us to, our service personnel and veterinary team, this would be the point of time where we would test to try to figure out what's going on with this group. So this was our quick example of what we have today. So via passive surveillance of our scores today, we observed that the mortality increased, our cough score increased, lameness score, diarrhea score increased, and then all of these indicators led us to do some additional testing. So this was a PRRS negative group at placement into finishing. Not surprisingly, we have our results here. So oral fluids. We also did have a tissue submission from this case, or a necropsy submission, and we see the PRRS positive via oral fluids, tissue homogenate, and then of course ASF and CFS negative. So that was just kind of led us to, from our current program, and then just kind of lead into the EPS. So what are we missing? We have all that here today. In contrast to the prior presenters, I have 0 actual ASF experience, which I'd like to keep that way. And it's probably the reason we're presenting this stuff here, is what are we missing? So I've never seen any of this stuff, thankfully. And so in our current program, really the main thing is we don't have any specific questions regarding foreign animal diseases. So vesicles, skin color changes, neurologic signs, bloody discharge, we don't have any of that stuff in there. Thankfully, we don't see it very often. So It's just not something we track. And then the last piece that's part of the enhanced passive surveillance is the kind of description of necropsy findings. So we do conduct quite a few necropsies on site. We just don't really record them into our system today. So to jump quickly, I just have one example here. So that looks similar to the slides that Rachel just presented, and I think kind of correlated somewhat with what you showed a little bit. So this is one example of a finishing site where we implemented an enhanced passive surveillance. Sorry, this thing's kind of touchy. So just to orient you here, this was a finishing site. We tried to pick sites that were PRRS negative for some of these diseases so we could actually kind of see something as we went forward. So the site was PRRS PED, Mycoplasma hive pneumonia negative, ASF negative, obviously. So week one, animals were placed at 50 pounds, a healthy group. And then we have our weekly scoring from week 1. I stopped at week 7 here in this case. You can see a little bit of maybe a kind of false positive clinical description in week 1. So it just kind of, as normal, takes a group to get a little adjusted into the sites. I think that kind of shows up here. Week 2, kind of just some minor clinical signs. And then week 3, we have no clinical signs. This group is doing great. And then all of a sudden in week 4, we see a lot of these signs start to point out. So anorexia off feed, increased mortality, respiratory signs, interstitial pneumonia, lymphadenopathy, and conjunctivitis. Probably a pretty typical PRRS break, right? If you look at that. And so we did our follow-up testing again based on the descriptions we saw here. And of course, the results were PRRS positive. So again, it highlights a PRRS break and I think matches some of the clinical signs we saw earlier in this case. And then also with the addition of some of the necropsy findings, which kind of help point us in one direction or another. So in summary on that specific site with these enhanced protocols, we observed the following signs as I mentioned there earlier. And that description would normally lead us to, yeah, it's likely a PRRS break. But as seen earlier, how many of these would you also see with ASF? So leading us down the road of trying to get some of the additional information. Thankfully in this case, and as Rachel showed, we did not observe some of the more classic ASF type lesions or descriptions, no bloody diarrhea, no bloody discharges, no hemorrhagic lymph nodes, no hemorrhagic signs across the board. So kind of lead you down the road that we're safe in that. But it was good to hear all the additional testing. You never know until you test. And so hopefully these additional measures can lead us to, if we start seeing some of these things, we absolutely have to do some additional testing. So just to kind of summarize of what Rachel showed there and what we've gone through here, our hope would be to get some more experience with the protocol here. One experience we've had is it is a little harder to get people excited about something that they've never seen and hopefully never see. So that's one thing. It's harder to get people to try to record some of those things. Our current surveillance methods, I think, work for the things we're looking for today, but obviously we would miss some of these other classic signs. One thing I'd like to bring up within our system, we've seen a lot of the virulent PRRS viruses, the 144L1C, et cetera. And I think one concern going forward could just be that we get complacent. So you get group after group that has a virulent PRRS virus, you just say, yeah, that's likely PRRS. We have high mortality. We have some classic signs of PRRS, and you just stop testing because you just think what you see over and over again is PRRS. And so in those cases, we may miss some of the additional testing, just assuming it is what we normally see. And then just to wrap up on that piece, I think it just continues to highlight we need to keep focusing on the zebras. I know that was part of the early presentation here today. We can't just assume all the time that everything is PRRS. And so having some of these additional descriptors, necropsy findings, can really help point us in a different direction and not just the normal. So with that, I'd like to thank you for sticking around today. Just a brief snapshot of the surveillance methods. And if we have time for questions, I can sure stay up here.
Questions for Dr. Shambo and Dr. Allerson? I have a question, Matt, for you. Brief introduction to my question first. So what we think that, and this is just a hypothesis, right? But African swine fever, what we have seen is that it spreads slowly. So if we could identify some of those early signs, we may be able to maybe diagnose the disease 1 week, 2 weeks before it actually becomes evident on the farm. And by that, we may be able to prevent secondary spread, right? So that's the objective of this conversation. But one of the pushbacks, Matt, that we receive is that, of course, people are busy on the farms. As you said, there are many things to do. We already have diseases that we know we have.
Yep.
So in your experience, how difficult it is to implement something like that?
Yeah, I think I would have loved to have more today to present to. We ended up with one good example at least of something that broke with PRRS. I think the issues are what you pointed out is every one of these, everybody that's collecting this data has 50 other different things they're supposed to be doing. And so I think some of the things you did, just making it really easy, do you see this specific clinical sign that you pretty well never see? Then hopefully that keeps reminding them to keep looking. Otherwise, you just, like I said, you get into that point where you think it's normal and move on. So I think just continuing highlighting those signs. The oral fluid piece before this was great. I didn't have time to explain here, but 90% of our diagnostics in grow finish are going to be oral fluids, so we have those today. So things like that can hopefully, in addition, help us catch things sooner.
Yeah, good point. Are there more questions? Yeah.
Can I ask what PRRS virus strain from that outbreak? Have you done the sequencing on the virus?
Yeah, actually both. Most of our viruses are 144L1C, so both of those examples were.
Is it the hypathogenic PRRS virus?
I think you could characterize it that way, but it'd be the specific 144L1C grouping. Yep.
Thank you.
Most of the viruses we're finding in our specific region today would be in that group.
This is a little bit similar to, I guess, what was asked before, but your caretakers on the farm, I know you're getting data, right?
Yep.
You're making decisions probably based on data, but what do you ask your team to look for, right? When they're on the farm and seeing, is it just anything that's out of the usual, or what's the protocol, I guess, for your team versus just data collection? Because that's important, but also the people on the ground, I would think, are important as well to catch. Right? I mean, that's a question.
Yeah, good question. So we try to highlight some of those in the specific pieces that we collect, like the cough, diarrhea as an example, so they have to look for it because they have to report it, obviously. But we have continued trainings on foreign animal diseases with our group, and so we're not recording them, but we have the continued training to say, hey, this is what you're going to see with ASF, or Seneca virus as an example would be another one. So just that continued training, but we train them, yes, to look for things that are out of the norm. But again, these people are also doing the marketing, the vaccinating potentially, and a lot of other things. So you can miss it and forget about it. But both, the daily caretakers and the weekly, we emphasize, look for those things that are out of the ordinary.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Yeah.